The airport bustled with activity, passengers hurrying to and fro. No one paid much attention to the man in the impeccably tailored military uniform until he was stopped. His documents were in perfect order. Yet something was amiss, preventing him from boarding his flight. A decorated army officer, the remains of a fallen soldier, and an airline making a grave error. They were unaware that this decision would ignite a firestorm they couldn't possibly contain. Would justice prevail? What truly transpired? This story will keep you riveted. Before we delve in, please leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories. Here's how it all began. A highly decorated army colonel, the remains of a fallen soldier, and a flight he was denied. The ensuing events shook the entire nation. The airport was teeming with people. Families lugged wheeled suitcases. Business travelers were glued to their phones. Children darted ahead of their weary parents. The usual chaotic scene. Colonel John Carter entered. His polished shoes clicked on the tiled floor. He'd been through this countless times. But today was different. The weight on his chest wasn't just from the ribbons and medals adorning his uniform. It stemmed from the flag-draped transfer case waiting on the tarmac. Private Michael Reynolds, 21 years old. Gone too soon. Colonel Carter adjusted his cap and took a deep breath. He had a mission to fulfill, a duty transcending rank or recognition. It wasn't about him. It was about a promise to every soldier who never made it home. No one gets left behind. He approached the airline counter, placing his military ID and orders on the counter. The woman behind the desk barely glanced at him. Initially, she typed away at her computer, frowning. Then she paused. A hesitation a millisecond too long. Sir, could I see these again? Her tone was strained. Carter handed back the documents, watching her vnimatilna. The slight frown of uncertainty, the furtive glance at her colleague, the subtle shift in her posture as if she'd entered uncharted territory. She turned, whispering something to another employee. He glanced over, his expression unreadable. The moment stretched, heavy with a familiarity that Carter had encountered before, yet never grown accustomed to. When she returned, her smile was rigid, strained. I apologize, sir, but there seems to be an issue with your ticket. We are unable to board you at this time. Carter exhaled slowly. He'd handled all manner of situations. Battlefields, foreign diplomacy, political entanglements. But this was different. I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier, he stated calmly, tapping the documents. Everything is in order. The agent avoided his gaze. I understand, sir, but there are security protocols and we cannot override them. Carter maintained his composure. Security protocols? Yes, sir, she replied, attempting another weak smile. It's just policy. He didn't move, didn't flinch. What policy? Behind him, the line grew longer, people shuffling, murmuring. He could feel their eyes on him. But instead of stepping aside, he squared his shoulders and stood firm. He wasn't leaving without an answer. But the airline employee was equally unyielding. The air around the counter seemed to thicken. The conversations in the queue behind him began to subside as people realized that seeing a man in full military dress being denied his flight wasn't an everyday occurrence. Colonel Carter remained calm, his voice steady. Ma'am, I need to understand exactly what the issue is. This is a military duty, not a personal trip. My paperwork is in order. The agent hesitated again. Her eyes darted toward other airline staff gathering nearby, whispering. A supervisor, a middle-aged man in his 50s with a weary expression, finally approached. He adjusted his name tag and folded his arms, glancing at Carter. Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience, he began, his voice carrying that practiced tone of professional detachment people adopt when they want you to stop asking questions. But we have certain regulations, and unfortunately, we cannot override them at this time. That phrase again. Regulations. Carter inhaled slowly through his nose. He'd seen this before, just in a different context. I've flown with military escorts before, he said, keeping his frustration buried beneath years of discipline. I know the procedures, and I know there are no regulations preventing me from boarding. So let's be honest, what's the real reason I'm being denied?" The supervisor cleared his throat and shifted his weight. "Simply an additional security measure. Nothing personal, sir. Nothing personal." The absurdity of it all. Carter clenched his jaw, refusing to let anger consume him. He'd been in too many rooms where people hid behind vague explanations like this. They were testing his patience, waiting for him to lose his cool, to give them a reason to call security. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. The people in the queue were watching. A woman in a red coat whispered something to her husband. A young man holding a boarding pass frowned, glancing at the airline staff as if he was trying to decipher what was happening. Then a voice cut through the tension. "Sir, is there a problem with his military orders?" Carter tilted his head slightly. A man, a few positions behind him in the line, had spoken up. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with a weathered face and a USMC cap pulled low over his brow. A Marine, a veteran. The supervisor appeared flustered. "No, sir, it's not about the orders. We're just following standard procedure." The Marine snorted. "Yeah, I've been through security 1,000 times, and I've never seen a procedure that stops a soldier from escorting one of our own home." He folded his arms. "So what's the deal?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the line. People began pulling out their phones, recording. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable. The staff behind the counter could feel it too. The agent who had initially denied Carter glanced at her supervisor, looking uncertain. The supervisor sighed, rubbing his temples. He looked at Carter again, the weight of the moment heavy. "Let me double-check," he mumbled before walking away. The agent at the counter kept her gaze lowered, suddenly very interested in her computer screen. Carter didn't move. He stood tall, shoulders squared, staring straight ahead. He wasn't going anywhere, and neither was this story. The murmuring in the terminal was no longer just background noise. The focus was intense, the air thick with tension. The people in the queue were no longer simply waiting for their flights. They were observing, recording. The Marine who had spoken up earlier wasn't the only one expressing his displeasure. A middle-aged woman in a denim jacket, clutching her purse tightly, shook her head and leaned towards her husband. "It's just not right," she murmured. "Him, in his uniform." A younger man in a hoodie pulled out his phone and started typing, his fingers moving rapidly. People were paying attention, and that was dangerous for the airline. Carter maintained an unreadable expression, but inside, he was taking note of every detail. The supervisor still hadn't returned, which meant one of two things. He was either fabricating an excuse or waiting for this to blow over. Neither was likely to happen. Then a voice came from behind him. "Excuse me, sir." Carter turned slightly. A young woman, no more than 25, stood a few steps away, phone in hand. Her eyes were uncertain but resolute. I don't mean to intrude, but I just want to make sure I understand. They're not letting you board?" Her voice wasn't loud, but the way she spoke, carefully, deliberately, made those nearby pay closer attention. Carter exhaled, glancing at the agent behind the counter. "That's correct." The young woman blinked as if she'd expected a different answer. She hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod and swiveled her phone screen towards him. "I'm live streaming," she said. "People need to see this." And just like that, the floodgates opened. Another man raised his phone. "This is wrong," he said, shaking his head. "This man is escorting a fallen soldier." A woman towards the back spoke up. "Hey, excuse me," she called towards the counter. "Can anyone explain why he's being denied?" A few people shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure whether they should get involved. But the energy in the room had shifted. What began as quiet murmurs had grown into something larger, something the airline staff couldn't ignore. The agent behind the counter looked as if she wanted to shrink into the floor. Her hands were frozen on the keyboard, her eyes darting between the camera lenses pointed at her. Then the Marine from before stepped forward. He was done playing nice. "I've seen a lot in my time," he said, his voice steady but firm, "but I never thought I'd see the day when an American soldier, especially one escorting the remains of a brother-in-arms would be treated like this. The terminal fell into an eerie silence. Even the usual airport announcements over the loudspeaker seemed distant, muted. The only sound was the recording beeps from phones capturing every second of what was unfolding. The Marine squared his shoulders. This is a disgrace. The agent swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled as she clicked the mouse once more. The supervisor was still nowhere to be seen. Passengers murmured. A baby wailed in a stroller, but the mother, instead of comforting the child, stared intently at her phone, reading something with a look of disgust. Then somewhere in the back of the line, a man muttered, "It's gone viral." Carter didn't move. He didn't have to. The whole world was watching. The tension in the terminal was palpable. The supervisor was still missing in action. The airline employee remained awkwardly silent. Phones were out, recording, tweeting, live-streaming. And then, like a spark to dry grass, it spread. The young man in the hoodie, still glued to his phone, gave a low whistle. Damn, it's everywhere. Carter didn't react. He knew better than to celebrate prematurely. But from the way the agent behind the counter had stiffened, he could tell she knew it too. The woman in the denim jacket checked her phone and gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered to her husband. "It's on Facebook." The older Marine grumbled, pulling out his own phone. They don't even know what kind of storm they just started. Then, as if on cue, the airport loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention passengers, due to unforeseen circumstances, Flight 237 to Phoenix will be delayed. We apologize for any inconvenience." A few groans rippled through the crowd, but most people barely paid attention. Their focus was here on the soldier in uniform being denied his flight while on official duty. A minute later, a young woman near the window gasped, "He's on Twitter." She turned her screen towards the crowd, and people craned their necks to see. A tweet was written in bold capital letters. "They just denied a black U.S. Army colonel his flight while he was escorting the remains of a fallen soldier. Is this how we treat our heroes?" Hashtag let them fly below it. The numbers were climbing. Retweets, comments, likes. It was exploding. Then another tweet appeared, this time from a veterans advocacy group. "We are aware of the shameful incident unfolding at airport name airport. Our soldiers deserve better treatment. Stand by for action." The crowd murmured, recognizing what it meant. The airline had officially lost control of the narrative. The agent behind the counter, still rooted to her spot, took a shaky breath. She turned and hurried towards the back, disappearing behind a frosted glass door. She didn't return with an answer. She returned with damage control. Carter adjusted his cap. He'd been in situations like this before. Not in an airport, not quite like this, but in places where powerful people suddenly realized they'd made the wrong enemy. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat, because ultimately this wasn't about him. It was about Private Michael Reynolds, the young man waiting to come home. And right now, that mission was still incomplete. The crowd wasn't just observing anymore. They were waiting. The terminal felt different now, charged with energy, anticipation. Then the supervisor finally returned, but he wasn't alone. A second man walked beside him, this one wearing a crisp navy suit, an airline ID clipped neatly to his lapel. His stride was brisk, controlled, like someone used to putting out fires. He stopped just short of the counter, surveying the scene. His eyes flickered between Carter, the Marine, and the sea of phones still recording. He cleared his throat. "Colonel, I apologize for this misunderstanding. There appears to have been a glitch in our system, but we're working to get you on your flight as soon as possible." Misunderstanding? Carter had been in the military long enough to know what that word really meant. It meant we got caught. It meant fix this before it costs us too much. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he let the moment stretch, watching the airline representative shift slightly under the weight of the silence. "I understand," Carter finally said, his voice measured. "A glitch, you say?" "Yes, sir. An unfortunate error. We assure you it was unintentional." A few people in the crowd scoffed. The Marine shook his head. The airline representative adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "We'd like to personally escort you to the gate. Colonel. First class, of course. First class? As if that was the point. Carter glanced past the man towards the counter, where the agent still stood, looking anywhere but at him. Still the same agent who had given him that tight, fake smile as she denied him his flight. Still the same one who hadn't bothered to double-check before saying no. Carter exhaled slowly. I appreciate the expediency, he said, but I need to clarify something. The representative nodded quickly. Of course. Carter's voice remained even. If no one was recording this, if no one had spoken up, would I still be standing here? A beat of silence. The representative swallowed. Sir, you don't have to answer, Carter interrupted. He already knew. Everyone in the terminal did. Another beat of silence. Then a woman in the crowd murmured, he's right. The representative tried to diffuse the tension once more. Sir, we sincerely apologize. We all know this isn't about an apology, Carter said. This is about accountability. The crowd murmured in agreement. People weren't just angry anymore. They were disappointed. The representative knew he was losing control. He straightened, adopting a more authoritative stance. Colonel, let's get you on your flight now. But before Carter could reply, a new voice cut through. Sir. A younger man in an airport security uniform had appeared at the side of the counter. He held a phone towards the airline representative, his expression grim. I think you should see this. The representative frowned, taking the phone. He scrolled, his face paling. The Marine folded, his arms. Something wrong? The representative didn't answer, but Carter already knew. The backlash had officially spread beyond the airport. A major news outlet had picked up the story. The headline was blunt. U.S. Army colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldiers' remains. Airline scrambles for answers. Below it, a video played showing footage from the terminal. The representative handed back the phone, took a shaky breath, and turned to Carter. We deeply regret this situation. His voice thinner now, strained. We'd like to issue a public statement to clarify. Carter cut him off. The public already knows the truth. Silence. The representative pursed his lips. Carter looked out at the crowd, at the phones still recording. He turned back to the representative. I don't need first class. I don't need special treatment. I need respect. And so does the soldier I'm escorting. Another murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The representative nodded stiffly, as if that was all he could manage now. Understood, sir. The Marine let out a small grunt of approval. Carter adjusted his cap. Now let me finish this mission. But the fallout for the airline was only just beginning. The airline had lost control of the situation. The story had spread faster than they could contain it. The terminal felt like a press conference now. Phones still recording, passengers still watching. Then something unexpected happened. A man in a dark blue suit with the unmistakable air of real authority entered the scene. He wasn't from the airline, he wasn't airport security. He was military. The room shifted. People moved aside instinctively as the man approached. His ID flashed briefly as he reached Carter and extended his hand. Colonel, he said firmly, I'm Major Robert Beckett, Department of the Army. We've been made aware of the situation. Carter shook his hand, his grip strong. He didn't need to ask how the major had gotten here so quickly. The Army didn't play around when it came to their own. Beckett turned to the airline representative, his voice sharp. We're handling this now. Colonel Carter and the remains of Private Michael Reynolds will not be flying commercial. The representative blinked. Sir, we've just smoothed things over. Beckett interrupted him. His tone was polite but carried a certain weight. He glanced at Carter. Sir, the Pentagon has arranged a private military flight. Your transport is waiting. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances. The U.S. Army had intervened. Carter exhaled, not out of relief. He didn't need rescuing, but because this mission was finally back on track. He gave a slight nod. Understood, Major. Beckett's gaze lingered on the airline representative one last time. This will be handled. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Carter turned to the Marine who had watched the entire exchange with quiet satisfaction. Thank you, brother, Carter said. The Marine inclined his head. "We take care of our own." Carter glanced around the room one last time, at the people who had spoken up, who had refused to let this slide, who had made sure this story was heard. He straightened his uniform, squared his shoulders, and walked out, not towards the gate, but towards something much bigger. But for the airline, the fallout was only just beginning. The airline thought the situation would die down, a few apologies, a press release, maybe a statement from their CEO, damage control. But the public wasn't letting this go. News networks picked it up. Veterans organizations released statements condemning the airline's actions. Politicians weighed in, demanding accountability. Then came the financial hit. By the end of the week, the airline's stock had plummeted. A trending hashtag calling for a boycott gained traction. Customers flooded their social media with demands for answers. And then the final blow, a lawsuit. A coalition of military advocacy groups filed a formal complaint against the airline for discrimination and failure to comply with military personnel protection measures. Under the pressure, the airline's CEO finally appeared before the public. He called it an unfortunate misunderstanding and announced that the employees involved had been suspended. Too little, too late. Meanwhile, Colonel Carter continued his duty. He escorted Private Michael Reynolds home, standing by as the young soldier's family received him one last time. He didn't need the headlines. He didn't need the attention. He needed respect. And that was the real battle. Respect shouldn't be conditional. It shouldn't require a viral video or public outrage. It should be the standard. The people at that airport, the Marine, the passengers who spoke up, those who refused to remain silent, they proved something important. When people stand together, injustice has nowhere to hide. If you believe in accountability, if you believe in honoring those who serve, speak up, because silence allows these things to happen again. And next time, it might not go viral. This story is a reminder that respect isn't a privilege. It should be the baseline. Sometimes all it takes is one person to speak up and the world listens. If you were in this situation, what would you do? Have you ever witnessed injustice and felt compelled to stand up for what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice can inspire others and make a difference. If this story resonated with you, share it with your friends and family to spread the message of respect, justice, and gratitude for those who serve our country. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more inspiring stories. We may not change the world in a day, but every small action counts. Have an amazing and meaningful day. Thank you for your support. Like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates. These stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared to promote human values in life and have been rewritten with the assistance of AI. If there are any errors, please forgive them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.